Have you ever wondered what the true limit of human endurance is? At 72 years old, I thought I knew all my limitations, that my days of extreme adventures were behind me, along with my youth. But there's something about facing death head-on that awakens a primal force that not even time can extinguish. My name is João, and what I'm going to share with you today happened just 3 months ago, when I decided to take on the most insane challenge of my life. Surviving 36 hours in a forest known for its wild wolves, armed only with basic equipment, and accompanied by my faithful companion Rex, a German shepherd trained for combat situations. Have you ever experienced this? That feeling of needing to prove something to yourself, even when everyone around you tells you're too old? The survival adventure began as a joke among veteran friends. "I bet you can't even last a night alone in the woods," my friend Carlos teased during a barbecue. At 72, with arthritis in my hands and a knee that complained with every long stride, I should have laughed at the idea, but something inside me clicked. Rex, who was lying at my feet, pricked up his ears as if he knew a new mission was coming. What you're about to discover may completely surprise you. Age, I've discovered, isn't necessarily a disadvantage when it comes to extreme survival. Decades of experience, patience developed over the years, and a calmness that only comes with maturity can be powerful weapons when you're battling elements bent on destroying you. But make no mistake, this wasn't a walk in the park. Stay with me until the end of this story, because what happened in that forest completely changed my perspective on personal boundaries and taught me lessons about courage that no self-help book could convey. Rex and I faced situations that tested not only our physical endurance but also our ability to work as a team when survival is at stake. Preparing for the challenge revealed the first fatal mistake that nearly cost us our lives before we even began. I chose a backpack with basic survival gear, a hunting knife, ropes, fire-making equipment, a water bottle, and 2 days' worth of rations. For Rex, I took only his tactical collar and some extra food. Too simple? Maybe. But the true survival adventure begins when you have to improvise with the bare minimum. The chosen forest is 200 kilometers from the city, known by locals as Wolf Country. For decades, this region has supported a stable population of gray wolves, predators that know no mercy when it comes to protecting their territory. Can you imagine the feeling of deliberately walking into the territory of animals that see you as a potential meal? As Rex and I crossed the first trail into that dense forest, with ancient trees blocking most of the sunlight even in broad daylight, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. It was a primal instinct warning me that we were entering something much bigger than we had imagined. My name is Harold Peterson. I'm 72 years old, and I live in Missoula, Montana, a city nestled deep in the heart of the American Rockies. After serving 20 years in the United States Army and another 25 as a forest ranger, I thought I knew everything about wilderness survival. But I've discovered that arrogance can be the most dangerous mistake a man can make, especially when he's in his 70s. It all began during a monthly meeting of our veterans group at the Missoula Community Center. We were sitting around that worn wooden table, drinking coffee and sharing the same war stories we'd told decades ago, when my old friend Bill Thompson, a former Marine sergeant, made a provocation that would change my life forever. Bill looked at me with that smirk I knew from my military days and said that today's veterans had become too soft, that we spent too much time sitting in rocking chairs complaining about back pain. He said none of us could survive even a night alone in the wilderness without our modern comforts. The taunt struck right at my pride. I had spent decades patrolling the Montana forests, knowing every trail, every river, every type of poisonous plant in an area spanning hundreds of square miles. As a retired forest ranger, I had rescued over 50 people lost in the woods, taught survival skills to Boy Scouts, and even trained Army recruits in field exercises. But Bill didn't stop there. He went on to say that even my dog, Rex, who was lying calmly at my feet, had probably lost his wild instincts after years of living a comfortable domestic life. Rex is a 7-year-old Belgian Malinois, originally trained for military operations before retiring and coming to live with me. During his years of active duty, he had worked in conflict zones in Afghanistan and Iraq, detecting explosives and assisting in reconnaissance missions. When I heard Bill question Rex's abilities, something inside me clicked. Rex lifted his head and looked at me with those intelligent, watchful eyes, as if he knew exactly what was being discussed. I could see in his eyes the same determination that had helped me through all those dangerous missions over the years. That's when I accepted the challenge. 36 hours of survival in the Lolo National Forest, one of the wildest and most dangerous areas in Montana. The chosen region was approximately 50 miles south of Missoula, known by local rangers as an area of high wildlife activity, including black bears, grizzlies, mountain lions, and most importantly for our story, one of the largest populations of gray wolves in the state. Lolo National Forest stretches over 2 million acres between Montana and Idaho, with land ranging from densely forested valleys to mountain peaks soaring over 10,000 feet. The specific area I chose for the challenge was known as the Wolf Creek section, a name that should have served as a warning of what was to come. Preparation began a week before the scheduled date. As a seasoned veteran, I knew that proper preparation was the difference between success and disaster in any survival mission. I spent hours organizing my gear, carefully choosing each item to carry in the military backpack that had accompanied me on dozens of expeditions over the years. The equipment list included a K-bar survival knife I had received during my military service, 15 meters of parachute cord, a basic fire-making kit with flint and dry tinder, a 1-liter military canteen, a small collapsible axe, an aluminum emergency blanket, 2 days' worth of military rations, salt, some basic bandages, and an emergency whistle. For Rex, I packed a special dog backpack with his own 3-day ration, a collapsible metal bowl, a reinforced tactical collar, and an extra safety tether. Rex had been trained to carry equipment during military missions, so I knew he could easily carry his own food and a few extra supplies without any problems. I also included a detailed topographic map of the area, a precision military compass, and a basic handheld GPS, though my plan was to rely primarily on traditional navigation techniques and Rex's abilities to find water and detect danger. During his years of military training, Rex had developed an impressive ability to detect human and animal presence at great distances, a skill I hoped was still sharp. The fatal mistake in my preparation was completely underestimating the region's weather conditions during that time of year. October in Montana can be unpredictable, with temperatures varying dramatically between day and night. During the day, thermometers could reach 15 degrees Celsius, but during the early morning hours, especially at higher elevations, temperatures could plummet to below freezing. My experience as a forest ranger told me I should carry more robust cold weather gear, but my pride as a seasoned veteran led me to believe an emergency blanket and my military jacket would suffice. After all, I'd spent freezing nights in trenches overseas. Surely I could handle the cold of a Montana forest. Another crucial mistake was failing to adequately research recent wildlife activity in the chosen area. As a former ranger, I had access to animal sighting reports, but I relied too heavily on past experience and failed to check the most recent data on wolfpack movements in the region. Had I done this basic research, I would have discovered that a particularly aggressive pack had been sighted several times in the area during the 2 weeks preceding our challenge. Reports indicated it was a pack of at least 8 adult wolves, led by a particularly territorial alpha male who had displayed unusual behavior when approaching human camps. The week of preparation passed quickly. Rex seemed to sense something important was approaching. During our morning walks on the trails around Missoula, he displayed more energy and alertness than usual, as if his military instincts were being reactivated. I took this as a good sign that he still had his survival skills sharp. The night before the challenge, as I was arranging all my gear for the last time on my kitchen table, I began to feel a strange mix of confidence and nervousness. Rex lay beside me, watching my every move intently, his constantly moving ears picking up every sound in the house and neighborhood. I called my daughter Sarah, who lives in Seattle, to tell her about the challenge. As expected, she was worried and tried to talk me out of it, arguing that at 72 I'd already proven everything I needed to prove in life, but I explained that this wasn't about proving anything to anyone but myself. It was about discovering if I still had the soldier and ranger inside me who had faced dangerous situations for decades. On the morning of departure, I woke at 5 a.m. to find Rex already standing beside my bed, fully alert and ready for adventure. The sky was still dark, but I could see through the windows that it would be a clear, cool day. The outside temperature was only 2 degrees Celsius, a harbinger of things to come. At breakfast, I shared my last hot meal with Rex, giving him an extra helping of his favorite kibble. I knew we'd both have to conserve energy and food for the next 36 hours, so I wanted to make sure we started our adventure well fed. The drive to the Lolo National Forest entrance took about 2 hours, driving my old Ford pickup truck along the winding road that cuts through the mountains south of Missoula. Rex spent most of the drive with his head out the window, sniffing the fresh mountain air and clearly excited by the wild smells that intensified as we approached the forest. When we finally reached our starting point, a small gravel parking lot next to the Wolf Creek Trail, the sun was just beginning to peek between the mountain peaks, creating a spectacle of gold and orange colors that cut through the morning mist. The temperature had risen to about 8 degrees, but I could sense in the air that it would be a day that would cool quickly once the sun set. Rex jumped out of the truck with renewed energy, immediately beginning to scan the area around the parking lot with his nose to the ground, gathering information about all the animals that had recently passed through. His movements were precise and methodical, exactly how I remembered seeing him work during his military missions. As I adjusted my backpack straps and did one last check of my gear, I looked around at the stunning landscape surrounding us. Pine and fir trees stretched as far as the eye could see, their canopies swaying gently in the morning breeze. The sound of a nearby stream provided a tranquil soundtrack that contrasted with the adrenaline pumping through my veins. It was at this point that I made my final preparation mistake. I saw a Forest Service sign warning of recent wildlife activity in the area, including a specific mention of wolf sightings. But instead of stopping to read the warning thoroughly and considering changing our destination, I simply assumed it was the standard warnings that exist in all national forests. If I had read that sign carefully, I would have discovered that it had been updated just 3 days earlier, with specific information about a wolf pack that had demonstrated aggressive territorial behavior in the exact area we were heading to. The sign advised hikers to avoid camping alone in the area and to keep groups of at least 4 people. With Rex by my side, his canine backpack perfectly adjusted and his posture alert and confident, I began hiking the trail that would take us deep into the Lolo National Forest. The first steps were taken with complete confidence, backed by decades of experience and the most reliable partner I could have chosen for this adventure. What I didn't know was that with every step we took deeper into the heart of that ancient, wild forest, we were moving closer to an experience that would test not only our survival skills, but our ability to work together as a team when our lives literally depended on it. The initial trail was well marked and relatively easy, winding through a dense forest of pine and fir that blocked most of the sunlight even in the middle of the day. Rex kept a steady pace beside me, occasionally stepping a few feet ahead to investigate an interesting scent before returning to formation. After about an hour of hiking, we reached a fork in the trail. The main path continued toward a developed campground about 3 miles away, but a secondary trail, less marked and obviously less used, continued toward the heart of the wilderness area I had chosen as our destination. It was at this fork in the road that I made the decision that would define the rest of our adventure. Instead of following the safer, more well-trodden path, I chose the secondary trail that would take us into a more remote and wild region. At the time, I thought I was being smart in choosing a spot where we would be less likely to encounter other hikers, thus ensuring that our survival test would be truly solitary. Rex seemed to hesitate for a moment at the fork, sniffing the air coming from the direction of the side trail with an intensity that should have alerted me. The hairs on his neck stood up slightly, a sign I recognized from our time working together, indicating he'd detected something he considered potentially dangerous. But my overconfidence led me to interpret Rex's reaction as excitement for the adventure that awaited us. I tapped him on the shoulder and told him not to worry, that we would soon be establishing our base camp and officially beginning our 36-hour survival challenge. As we followed the secondary trail, the forest around us gradually began to change. The trees grew taller and denser, creating a canopy that almost completely blocked the sunlight. The sound of our footsteps on the dry leaves and fallen branches seemed to echo eerily through the trees, creating an atmosphere that was both majestic and slightly unsettling. Rex continued to display signs of heightened alertness, stopping frequently to sniff the air and look intently in specific directions in the forest. His movements were precise and controlled, exactly how I remembered seeing him behave during reconnaissance missions in hostile territory. The preparation was over, and now we were officially entering the execution phase of our survival adventure. With each step we took toward the heart of that ancient wild forest, we were moving away from the safety of civilization and closer to an experience that would test every limit we thought we knew about ourselves. The air was getting colder as we advanced to higher altitudes, and I could feel the humidity rising as we approached an area of valleys and streams that I had identified on the map as our ideal destination for establishing base camp. After 3 hours of steady hiking along the secondary trail, Rex and I finally reached the area I'd selected on the map as our destination. It was a small valley surrounded by hills covered in ancient pines, with a crystal-clear stream winding through its center and several clearings that looked ideal for setting up camp. The altitude had increased considerably since our starting point, and I could feel the thinner air filling my lungs with each deep breath. The location seemed perfect for our survival challenge. There was fresh running water, abundant firewood, plenty of flat terrain for shelter, and a clear view of the sky that would allow me to use the stars for nighttime navigation. As a former forest ranger, I recognized all the signs of a good wilderness camping spot. Rex, however, was displaying increasingly restless behavior. Ever since we arrived in the valley, he had been sniffing the air intensely, his constantly moving ears picking up sounds my human ears couldn't detect. Occasionally, he would stop completely and remain motionless for a few seconds, staring intently at a specific spot in the forest around us. During my years working with military-trained dogs, I've learned to recognize the different types of alertness they display. There's a clear difference between the normal curiosity of a dog exploring a new environment and the heightened alertness that signals the presence of something potentially dangerous. Rex was definitely in the latter state. I decided to do a more thorough exploration of the area before choosing the exact spot for our camp. I left my backpack leaning against a large tree near the stream and began walking through the valley, carefully observing the terrain and looking for signs of wildlife that might indicate what types of animals frequented the area. It was during this initial exploration that I encountered the first worrying sign. Near the creek bank, in the soft mud left by the recent rain, I found fresh tracks that I immediately recognized as those of wolves. They weren't old or weathered, but clear, distinct marks that indicated the animals had passed through very recently, likely during the previous night or in the early hours of that morning. The tracks weren't those of a lone wolf. By carefully examining the area around the creek, I was able to identify at least 5 distinct sets of tracks, suggesting a sizable pack. Some of the tracks were significantly larger than others, indicating the presence of at least one large alpha male, likely weighing over 110 pounds. Rex approached the tracks and immediately went on high alert. His hackles rose from his neck to his tail, and he assumed a defensive posture I recognized from our time working together in conflict zones. It was the same posture he assumed when he detected the presence of enemy fighters during reconnaissance patrols. As I examined the tracks more closely, I noticed a specific pattern around the creek. The wolves weren't simply passing through the area to drink, as would normally be the case. The tracks suggested they had spent considerable time exploring the entire area, marking their territory, and possibly searching for something specific. I followed the tracks about 50 meters into the forest and discovered something that made my blood run cold. In a small clearing surrounded by dense bushes, I found the remains of a recent meal. Partially gnawed bones, tufts of fur, and stains of still fresh blood on the grass indicated the pack had hunted and fed there very recently. The size of the bones and the amount of remains scattered throughout the clearing suggested the kill had been a medium-sized animal, likely a young deer or perhaps a smaller elk. More troubling was that the remains were still relatively fresh, with blood that hadn't completely dried, indicating the hunt had taken place no more than 12 hours before our arrival. This meant we were entering the territory of an active and successful wolf pack, precisely during the period when they would be most territorial and protective of their hunting grounds. As a former game warden, I knew that well-fed wolves generally avoid contact with humans, but I also knew that an established pack can become aggressive if it feels its territory is being invaded. I returned to where I'd left my backpack and found Rex still on high alert, his eyes fixed in a specific direction in the forest. Following his gaze, I could glimpse movement among the trees about 100 meters away. It was difficult to make out exactly what was moving due to the dense cover of branches and leaves, but there was definitely something large moving deliberately through the undergrowth. At that moment, I had to make a crucial decision that would define the rest of our adventure. As a seasoned veteran and former forest ranger, I knew that the confirmed presence of an active wolf pack in the area posed a significant risk to our safety. The sensible decision would be to abandon the area immediately and seek a different area for our survival challenge. On the other hand, I had taken on this challenge specifically to prove that at 72, I was still capable of handling extreme situations in the wilderness. Running away at the first sign of danger would be admitting that my friend Bill was right about veterans becoming too soft to face real adversity. Furthermore, Rex had been specifically trained to operate in hostile environments. During his years of military service, he had faced situations far more dangerous than a pack of wolves in a Montana forest. I had complete confidence in his threat detection skills and our ability to work together as a team in dangerous situations. I looked at Rex and saw in his eyes the same calm determination I remembered from our time working together. He wasn't showing fear, just heightened alertness and readiness to act as needed. This gave me the confidence to continue with our original plan, albeit with extra precautions due to the situation we'd discovered. I decided we would establish our camp in a strategic defensive position. Instead of choosing one of the open clearings near the stream, I opted for a slightly elevated spot on a small tree-covered hill, which would give us a better view of the surrounding area and make it more difficult for any animals to approach undetected. The chosen spot was about 30 meters from the stream, enough for easy access to the water but high enough to give us a tactical advantage. There was a natural rock formation that could serve as a backstop, and several large trees that would offer additional cover. As I began clearing the ground for our camp, Rex took up a guard position, positioning himself so he had a clear view from all possible directions of approach. His movements were precise and professional, exactly as I remembered seeing him work during perimeter security missions in combat zones. Setting up camp took about 2 hours, during which Rex maintained constant vigilance. Occasionally, he would alert me with a subtle twitch of his ears to sounds or scents he detected, but nothing that indicated immediate danger. It seemed the wolves were keeping their distance for now, likely observing our activities from afar to assess whether we posed a threat. During the camp preparation work, I observed further evidence of wolves' presence in the area. Scratch marks on several trees indicated territorial marking behavior, and I found 2 spots where the grass had been flattened in a way that suggested the animals had recently rested there. The pattern of evidence I was finding told me we weren't dealing with nomadic wolves just passing through the region. This was clearly an established pack that considered this valley its primary territory. They knew every trail, every water source, every hunting ground. We were the intruders in their home. As the sun began to set behind the mountains, creating long shadows between the trees, the temperature began to drop rapidly. This raised a new concern. Wolves are significantly more active during the cooler hours of the day, especially at dusk and dawn. We were entering the time of day when they would be most likely to investigate our presence more directly. Rex seemed to instinctively understand that we were entering the most dangerous phase of the next 36 hours. He positioned himself so he had a clear view of the entire area around our camp and assumed an alert posture that I recognized as his preparation for a prolonged night watch. As I organized our supplies and prepared the spot where we would build our first campfire, I began to hear the first sounds that definitively confirmed the presence of wolves nearby. It was a distant howl, coming from the opposite direction of the valley entrance, followed by a response from another wolf located in a different position. The howls didn't sound aggressive or territorial. They were more like communication calls, likely pack members locating each other as they prepared for their nightly activities. But the confirmed presence of at least 2 wolves in different positions around the valley meant we were effectively surrounded. At that moment, the reality of our situation became starkly clear. We weren't simply camping in a forest occasionally visited by wildlife. We had set up camp in the heart of a wolf pack's active territory, during the period when they would be most active and territorial. Rex and I exchanged a look that communicated more than words could express. We both understood that the next few hours would test not only our survival skills, but also our ability to remain calm and work effectively as a team when faced with a potentially dangerous situation. The sun finally disappeared completely behind the mountains, and the forest around us began to transform into a completely different environment. Sounds that were barely audible during the day became amplified in the stillness of the night. The wind in the trees, the sound of the stream rushing over the rocks, and occasionally the distant howls of wolves created a soundtrack that was both beautiful and unsettling. I lit our first fire using traditional flint techniques, creating a source of light and heat that would serve multiple purposes throughout the night. The fire would not only keep us warm during the cold hours ahead, but it would also serve as a psychological barrier that most wild animals would avoid crossing. Rex positioned himself between the fire and the thickest part of the forest, assuming a position that would allow him to detect any approach while still receiving the heat of the fire. His eyes glowed with the reflection of the flames, creating an image that strongly reminded me of the times we stood night watch in military camps in hostile territory. As the night deepened and the temperature continued to drop, the wolf howls became more frequent and seemed to be moving slightly closer to our camp. It was impossible to determine exactly how many animals were in the area, but based on the direction and timing of the different howls, I estimated there were at least 5 or 6 wolves positioned at strategic points around the valley. The realization that we were surrounded by wild predators in a remote forest, miles away from the nearest person, should have frightened me. Instead, I felt a strange mix of adrenaline, excitement, and a kind of focused calm I hadn't experienced in years. It was as if decades of experience in dangerous situations were finally being put to the test again. Rex seemed to share this sentiment. Instead of showing anxiety or fear, he displayed the same controlled confidence I remembered from our days working together. We were facing a dangerous situation, but we were an experienced and well-trained team. We had faced worse adversities in our careers, and we knew we could count on each other. The first night in Lolo National Forest proved to be a completely different experience from any other night I had spent in the wilderness during my years as a ranger. Even with decades of experience camping in remote environments, I had never encountered a situation where I genuinely felt like prey being watched by organized and intelligent predators. Rex and I established a shift system to maintain constant vigilance throughout the night. As a military veteran, I knew the crucial importance of never leaving a camp completely unguarded in hostile territory. Rex took the first watch while I tried to get a few hours of rest, strategically positioned between our campfire and the thickest part of the forest. For the first 2 hours of the night, wolf howls continued to echo through the valley at regular intervals. What struck me most was the apparent organization of these calls. They weren't random or chaotic howls, but rather a clear form of coordinated communication. A wolf would howl from one direction, be answered by another from a different position, and then a third would add its voice to the mix. As a former game warden who had studied wildlife behavior for years, I recognized this pattern as typical of a pack establishing patrol positions around a specific perimeter. They weren't simply passing through the area or hunting randomly. They were systematically and intelligently surrounding us. Around 10 o'clock that night, Rex woke me with a gentle touch of his paw on my arm, a signal we'd developed over our years of working together to signal alertness without making a sound. I immediately sat up quietly and looked in the direction he was pointing with his nose. About 50 meters from our position, I could make out 2 pairs of eyes glowing in the reflection of our campfire. The eyes remained visible for approximately 10 minutes, never moving or blinking, simply observing us with an intensity that was almost palpable. Throughout this time, Rex maintained a posture of controlled alertness, ready to act but without showing unnecessary aggression that might provoke a premature confrontation. Eventually, the eyes disappeared as silently as they had appeared, but both Rex and I knew the watchers hadn't gone away. They had simply shifted positions to continue their surveillance from a different angle. During my watch, which began at midnight, I had the opportunity to observe the wolves' behavior in more detail. Every hour or so, I could detect movement in the shadows around our camp. These were never direct or threatening approaches, but rather careful and methodical investigations of our presence. Most impressive was the coordination the animals demonstrated. When one moved from one position to another, there were always at least 2 others keeping watch from different angles. It was a demonstration of group tactics that rivals human military strategies. Around 3 in the morning, the first real test of our defensive preparation occurred. Rex alerted me to closer than usual movement, and I could detect a dark shape moving deliberately toward us, using the trees for cover but clearly approaching the perimeter of our campfire. At that moment, I had to make a critical decision about how to react. An overly aggressive response could provoke a coordinated attack by the entire pack. A too passive response could be interpreted as weakness and encourage an even bolder approach. I opted for a controlled display of force. I slowly got up, grabbed a thick branch near the fire, and lit it as a makeshift torch. Rex immediately positioned himself beside me, adopting an alert but non-aggressive stance. Together, we walked a few steps toward the approaching fire, the torch raised to increase the circle of light around our position. The strategy worked perfectly. The dark form immediately halted its approach and, after a few moments of mutual assessment, slowly retreated back into the shadows. It was a clear demonstration that they respected our ability to defend ourselves, but were not afraid enough to completely abandon their vigilance. We returned to our position near the fire, but maintained high alert for the rest of the night. The approach tests were repeated twice more before dawn, always following the same pattern: a cautious approach, assessing our response, and a calculated retreat when we demonstrated readiness to defend ourselves. As the first rays of sunlight began to filter through the treetops around 6 in the morning, the howling gradually subsided, and the wolves' presence near the camp became less noticeable. Wolves are primarily nocturnal, so their activity decreases significantly during daylight hours. Rex and I used the early morning hours to assess our situation and make necessary adjustments to our camp. Overnight, we had learned valuable information about the pack's behavior patterns, their preferred approach routes, and their investigative tactics. The first adjustment was to expand our security perimeter. During the night, I noticed that our campfire created an effective circle of light approximately 10 meters in radius. Anything beyond that distance remained in shadows, providing perfect cover for undetected approaches. I decided to create smaller campfires at strategic points around the camp to eliminate these blind spots. I also reorganized our supplies to create better quick access to essential items during nighttime emergencies. The K-bar knife was positioned within easy reach of my right hand. The makeshift torch was ready for instant use, and the rations were organized so we could grab a quick meal without being distracted from our vigilance. Rex demonstrated impressive adaptive behaviors during those first 12 hours. His military experience was clearly being reactivated as he adjusted to the demands of the situation. He developed patrol patterns around the camp, established preferred observation positions, and created a signal system to communicate various types of alerts to me without making noise. During our first morning meal at camp, consisting of military rations warmed over the campfire and fresh water from the stream, we had the opportunity to discuss our strategy for the next 24 hours. Obviously, we couldn't have a detailed verbal conversation without alerting potential observers to our plans, so we developed a communication system based on gestures and signals that we had used during military missions years ago. The plan we developed prioritized flexibility and preparedness for multiple possible scenarios. If the wolves maintained their pattern of careful but non-aggressive investigation, we would continue our controlled defensive strategy, maintaining constant vigilance but avoiding unnecessary provocations. If they escalated to bolder approaches during the next night, we would have more assertive tactics prepared to definitively discourage them. We also established emergency protocols for various extreme situations. If we were directly attacked, Rex was instructed to create distractions while I prepared improvised defenses using our campfire and available tools. If I were injured or incapacitated, Rex knew how to signal for help and guide potential rescuers back to our camp. During the daylight hours of the first 12 hours, I took advantage of the opportunity to conduct a more detailed reconnaissance of the area around our camp. I identified several possible escape routes in case we needed to abandon our position quickly, located alternative water sources besides the mainstream, and mentally marked the locations of useful materials like rocks for defense and additional dry wood to keep fires going. The exploration revealed further evidence of the wolf's widespread presence in the region. I found at least 3 additional recent resting sites, 2 territorial markings on trees, and the remains of another meal that appeared to have occurred the previous night while we were setting up camp. Even more worrying, the tracks I found during my morning exploration showed that at least 2 members of the pack had completely circled our camp during the night, passing within 20 meters of our position in some places. This confirmed that their investigations had been even closer and more detailed than I had realized in the darkness. Rex followed the entire morning's exploration, showing particular interest in the locations where we found the most recent evidence of wolf activity. At several points, he stopped to intensely sniff the ground and air, evidently cataloging olfactory information about specific pack members. Military dogs are trained to identify individual threats by scent, a skill that would be extremely valuable if we needed to distinguish between different pack members in low visibility situations. Around noon, when the sun was at its highest point and the temperature had risen to approximately 18 degrees Celsius, we decided to use the period of less wolf activity to further strengthen our camp defenses. We collected suitably sized rocks to use as projectiles if necessary, cut additional branches to maintain abundant fuel for our fires, and created a makeshift barricade using fallen logs to provide additional protection on one of the most vulnerable sides of our position. During this fortification work, Rex maintained constant vigilance, but his behavior indicated that the wolf presence in the vicinity had significantly decreased during the hours of intense sunlight. This gave us confidence that we would have a few hours of relative safety to rest and prepare for the second night, which promised to be even more challenging than the first. The experience of the first 12 hours had taught us valuable lessons about the rules of engagement in this hostile environment. The wolves were not indiscriminate aggressors seeking direct confrontation. They were intelligent and calculating predators, carefully assessing our defensive capabilities and looking for signs of weakness or opportunity. Our strategy of demonstrating controlled force without unnecessary provocation had established a delicate balance of mutual respect. They recognized that we were capable of defending ourselves effectively, while we recognized that they had significant advantages in numbers, knowledge of the territory, and adaptation to the nocturnal environment. Rex had adapted magnificently to the demands of the situation, his dormant military skills being reactivated in impressive fashion. Coordination between us was functioning as smoothly as ever, with efficient nonverbal communication and absolute mutual trust in each other's capabilities. As the afternoon wore on and we began to mentally prepare for the second night of our challenge, we both understood that the next 12 hours would likely be even more intense. The wolves had completed their initial assessment of our presence and capabilities. The next phase of the test would be more direct and potentially more dangerous. The sun began its descent toward the horizon around 4 in the afternoon, and we immediately noticed subtle changes in the environment around us. Sounds that had been nearly absent during the middle of the day began to gradually return. Birds became quieter, small forest animals decreased their activity, and an almost palpable tension began to build in the air. Rex was the first to detect the return of the wolves' presence nearby. Around 5 o'clock in the afternoon, his ears became more active, picking up sounds that were still beyond my human perception. Gradually, his posture became more alert, indicating that our night watchers were returning to their positions around the valley. During these final moments of the first phase of our survival challenge, I felt a complex mix of apprehension and determination. The first 12 hours had confirmed that we were facing formidable opponents who deserved our full respect, but they had also demonstrated that our combined skills and experience were sufficient to handle the challenges presented. Rex and I exchanged a look that communicated our mutual readiness to face whatever the second night might bring. We had learned the basic rules of the game, established our defensive capabilities, and developed strategies tailored to the specific realities of our situation. Now it was a matter of applying these lessons during the most dangerous hours yet to come. The temperature began to drop again as the sun approached the mountains, and the first distant howls echoed through the valley, signaling that the second phase of our survival test was officially beginning. The second night in Lolo National Forest began dramatically differently than the first. As the sun completely disappeared behind the mountain peaks around 6 o'clock in the evening, the temperature quickly plummeted to around 2 degrees Celsius, creating a thin mist that began to form over the creek near our campsite. The intense cold wasn't just uncomfortable, it completely changed the dynamics of our survival situation. Rex had spent the entire afternoon in a state of increasing alert, his ears picking up sounds that gradually became audible to me as well. The wolves' howls began earlier than the previous night and with a different intensity. They were no longer the cautious exploratory calls of the first night, but more assertive and coordinated communications that suggested a change in the pack's attitude toward our presence. During my years as a forest ranger, I had learned to interpret different types of wolf vocalizations, and the sounds that began echoing through the valley around 7 o'clock that night were unmistakably territorial. The pack was no longer simply investigating intruders on their territory. They were declaring active ownership of the area and warning that our continued presence would not be tolerated indefinitely. The first sign that tonight would be fundamentally different came when Rex detected simultaneous movement in 3 different directions around our camp. His ears swiveled constantly between different points of interest, and his posture indicated that we were no longer dealing with individual investigations, but with a coordinated approach by multiple pack members. Around 8 o'clock that night, I was able to visually confirm the presence of at least 4 pairs of eyes reflecting the light of our main fire from strategic positions around the camp perimeter. Unlike the previous night, these observers didn't hide when they realized they'd been detected. They held their positions defiantly, creating a palpable sense of siege that was both fascinating and terrifying. The defensive strategy that had worked the night before needed to be quickly adapted to deal with this escalation in wolf aggression. Instead of individual investigations that could be discouraged with isolated displays of force, we were now facing a coordinated action that required constant vigilance from multiple directions simultaneously. Rex and I developed a makeshift system where we positioned ourselves back to back in the center of the camp, each responsible for monitoring a roughly 180-degree arc around us. This allowed us to maintain constant visual observation of the entire surrounding area while maintaining communication through subtle touches and hand signals. Around 9 o'clock that night, the situation escalated to a whole new level of tension. One of the wolves, apparently the alpha male based on his significantly larger size than the others, began deliberately approaching our camp in a way that left no doubt about his intentions to directly test our defenses. The approach was slow and calculated, using every tree and bush for cover, but never stopping or retreating when we detected we were being observed. It was a clear display of dominance and a direct test of our willingness and ability to defend our established territory. When the alpha wolf reached about 20 meters from our main fire, he stopped and remained perfectly still for several minutes, studying us with an intensity that was almost hypnotic. During these moments of mutual appraisal, I was able to observe in detail a magnificent specimen of an adult gray wolf, probably weighing over 55 kilograms, with dense winter fur and yellow eyes that shone with predatory intelligence. Rex maintained perfect control during this direct confrontation, demonstrating the military discipline that had been drilled into him during years of active service. Instead of reacting with instinctive aggression that could have provoked an immediate attack, he assumed a high alert posture that communicated a readiness to defend without unnecessarily provoking. After about 5 minutes of silent assessment, the alpha wolf slowly retreated a few meters, but did not return to the shadows as he had the night before. Instead, he established an observation position about 15 meters from the camp, clearly indicating that the investigation phase was over and that they were now in active surveillance mode of our behavior. Over the next hour, between 9 and 10 p.m., other pack members began establishing visible positions around our perimeter. Eventually, I could count at least 6 adult wolves positioned at strategic points, creating a near-complete encirclement of our camp. Each animal maintained a distance of approximately 15 to 20 meters, close enough to intervene quickly if necessary, but far enough away to avoid provoking an immediate defensive reaction from us. The pack's coordination during this siege operation was impressive by any standard. Each wolf occupied a position that eliminated possible escape routes while maintaining visual communication with at least 2 other pack members. It was a demonstration of military tactics that rivaled human perimeter control strategies. Around 10:30 that night, the situation reached its peak of tension when the pack began testing our reactions through simulated coordinated approaches. 2 or 3 wolves would move simultaneously toward camp from different directions, forcing Rex and I to quickly reposition ourselves to maintain adequate defensive cover. These tests weren't actual attack attempts, but rather systematic assessments of our response capabilities, reaction speed, and coordination as a defensive team. Each test revealed valuable information about our strengths and weaknesses, which the pack was obviously cataloging for future use. During one of these coordinated tests, Rex demonstrated exceptional prowess when 3 wolves initiated simultaneous approaches from different directions. Instead of focusing solely on the closest threat, he developed a movement pattern that allowed him to maintain awareness of all 3 approaches, while signaling to me the direction and intensity of each threat through our nonverbal communication system. The collaboration between Rex and I during these critical moments worked with a precision that astounded me. Decades after our last joint military mission, our ability to work as an integrated unit remained intact. Our every move perfectly complemented the other's actions, creating a coordinated defense that was significantly more effective than the sum of our individual capabilities. Around midnight, when the temperature had dropped to about -2 degrees Celsius, the nature of the tests changed again. Instead of multiple simultaneous approaches, the pack began implementing a strategy I recognized from my studies of predatory behavior: psychological attrition attacks. A wolf would approach the edge of our defensive perimeter and remain motionless for prolonged periods, creating constant tension that required continuous vigilance. After 20 or 30 minutes, that wolf would retreat, and another would take up the same position from a different direction. The goal was clearly to keep us on high alert for prolonged periods until fatigue compromised our response capabilities. This psychological warfare strategy was particularly effective because it forced us to maintain unsustainable levels of adrenaline and concentration for hours at a time. As a military veteran, I recognized the tactic as similar to siege techniques used to break defenders' morale through sustained psychological pressure rather than direct assault. Rex seemed to instinctively understand what was happening and developed a brilliant adaptive response. Instead of maintaining constant high alert during all observation periods, he established a rotating surveillance system where he alternated between periods of intense observation and periods of controlled rest, always maintaining a minimum level of situational awareness. Around 2 a.m, just as my own energy levels were beginning to suffer from the prolonged tension, the pack initiated the most direct and dangerous test of the night. The alpha wolf, accompanied by 2 other pack members, began a slow but determined approach that was clearly no longer a test, but a serious investigation of our willingness to use lethal force if necessary. During this critical approach, I had to make decisions that could determine whether we would survive the night. Using excessive force could provoke a coordinated attack by the entire pack. Showing weakness or hesitation could be interpreted as an opportunity for further escalation of aggression. I decided to implement an escalatory show of force strategy. I grabbed the folding axe from my backpack and a makeshift torch, and together with Rex, I advanced a few meters toward the approaching enemy. It wasn't an aggressive action, but rather a clear statement that we were prepared to defend our territory with lethal force if necessary. The response was immediate and revealing. The 3 wolves immediately stopped their approach and, after a few moments of assessment, retreated to their previous observation positions. It was confirmation that they respected our ability to inflict significant damage, but also an indication that they were not ready to completely abandon their territorial intentions. During the remaining hours of the night, between 2 and 6 a.m., the pack maintained constant vigilance but made no further direct approaches. The howls continued at regular intervals, communications that clearly included information about our presence and defensive capabilities, which were being transmitted to other pack members, possibly located in different parts of the territory. As dawn approached and the first signs of light began to appear on the eastern horizon, the psychological pressure of the night gradually began to ease. The wolves held their positions until the sunlight became intense enough to reduce their natural night vision advantages, at which point they began to retreat to denser areas of the forest. The second night's experience had taught us that we were dealing with adversaries who were not only physically formidable, but also demonstrated impressive levels of tactical intelligence and group coordination. These were not simply instinctive predators reacting to our presence, but calculating strategists systematically assessing our capabilities and developing specific plans to deal with us. Rex and I had survived the most intense night of pressure either of us had experienced in decades, and our ability to work effectively as a team had been tested and confirmed under extreme conditions. But we also understood that the third and final night of our challenge would likely be even more challenging, as the pack implemented whatever final strategy they had developed based on the information gathered during their 2 nights of investigation. When the sun finally rose fully and the temperature began to rise slightly, we both felt a profound relief at having survived the night of terror. But we also felt a growing admiration for the intelligence and organization of our adversaries, who had demonstrated capabilities that challenged many human assumptions about animal behavior. The dawn of our second day in Lolo National Forest brought with it a disturbing revelation about the physical and mental state Rex and I were in after 24 hours of constant tension and extreme vigilance. When the first rays of sunlight began to filter through the dense tree cover surrounding our campsite around 6 a.m, I immediately sensed something fundamentally different in my body. The body temperature I had managed to maintain throughout the night through constant activity and proximity to the fires began to drop dramatically as the adrenaline from the night's confrontation began to dissipate. My hands were shaking uncontrollably, not only from the intense cold that had set in during the early morning hours, but also from the cumulative effects of prolonged stress on a 72-year-old body. Rex showed equally worrying signs of physical exhaustion. During the night, his energy and alertness had been maintained by survival instincts and military training. But now, in the bright light of day, I could see that he was visibly exhausted. His breathing was heavier than normal. his movements less precise, and he occasionally trembled slightly, indicating that the combination of extreme cold and prolonged stress had taken its toll on even his exceptional endurance. An honest assessment of our physical condition revealed issues that could seriously compromise our ability to complete the remaining 12 hours of our survival challenge. My fingers were beginning to show early signs of hypothermia, with a slightly bluish tinge and significant loss of sensation that made fine motor tasks like manipulating small equipment or tying knots in rope difficult. Even more concerning was the fact that my judgment was being affected by the combination of sleep deprivation, extreme stress, and the onset of hypothermia. During my years as a park ranger, I had seen people in survival situations make fatal decisions because their mental faculties had been compromised by adverse physical conditions before they even realized they were in real danger. Rex, while demonstrating superior physical endurance to mine due to his younger age and military conditioning, also showed signs of operating near his limits. His ability to maintain sustained alertness for prolonged periods, which had been impressive during the night, was clearly being tested by the cumulative effects of 2 consecutive nights of near-total wakefulness. The situation became even more complicated when I took an honest look at our remaining supplies. Over the previous 24 hours, we had consumed significantly more food and water than I had originally planned. The constant physical and mental stress had drastically increased our caloric needs, and the need to maintain multiple fires throughout the night had depleted our dry fuel reserves much more quickly than anticipated. The remaining military rations were enough for just 1 full meal for each of us, with a few emergency energy bars that could provide minimal sustenance for a few more hours. The water in the canteen was half empty, and although the nearby stream provided plenty of fresh water, the purification process by boiling required additional fuel that we didn't have in abundance. Even more critical was the condition of our tools and safety equipment. The K-bar knife had been used extensively over the past 24 hours for cutting wood, preparing food, and as a potential defense tool, and was beginning to show signs of wear that could compromise its effectiveness in critical situations. The folding axe, which had become essential to our ability to maintain adequate fires, had a slightly dulled blade from constant use in hardwoods and occasional accidental contact with rocks during night work in low visibility conditions. At this critical juncture, as the full reality of our situation became clear in the light of day, I was faced with a decision that would define not only the success or failure of our original challenge, but potentially our long-term survival. Continuing with the original plan of completing 36 hours in the forest would mean facing a 3rd night in significantly compromised physical condition with limited supplies, and against adversaries who had spent 2 days studying our capabilities and developing more effective strategies.